Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back, homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans, all the work from home workers out there. I'm your host, Naresh Fissa, with my co-host, Adam Schrader, and with an awesome guest. His name is Fernando Cruz. Fernando and I, we go a little bit back. I wouldn't say way back, but we go a little bit back. We're former colleagues at Stansberry Research, and now Fernando is, I think, probably one of the greatest living digital marketers. He's really come a long way. He's a managing partner and chief marketing officer at Legacy Research. He's here to talk today about Legacy Research, what they do, the online and digital marketing tactics that they utilize, how they've kind of switched to the remote environment and they're working from home. Also about webinars and how people can not only produce webinars, but make a lot of money off webinars. Fernando has made tens, actually, I think hundreds of millions of dollars through webinars over the past 5 or 6 years. He's really the expert on this topic. So, Fernando, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Thanks, Naresh. I really appreciate it. First of all, thank you for your comments earlier. But the one thing I should mention is that the capacity in which we met, you were sort of running the radio show podcast that they had there, and I remember thinking that that piece of content that Stansberry produced at the time is probably one of my favorite things to consume there. So you just did an awesome job in putting that thing together and really growing it to where it got. So just a really amazing work you did there, man. I've been watching you ever since, man.
Well,
not in a weird, creepy way, but
been Facebook stalking, lurking back there.
Yeah, well, I definitely appreciate those words. We actually interviewed James Altucher recently, and it was really the Stansberry radio network that got him the foot in the door when it came to his newsletters, his podcasts, and all the other great things. So it's like a blast from the past that I've gotten through our own podcast.
Yeah, that's awesome. I haven't seen James in a few years. It's definitely good to hear that he's still making the rounds. That's awesome.
Yeah. So Fernando, let's jump right into Legacy Research. So Legacy Research is a financial research company that utilizes, I think, some of the best digital marketing strategies that we've talked about on this show. Strategies like copywriting, webinars. Tell us a little bit more about Legacy Research, the products that it sells, the business model, and your role as partner and chief marketing officer.
Yeah, so Legacy Research, we publish newsletters. I mean, the bottom line is we publish newsletters that help investors make decisions and choices as to what they're going to do with their money. We're different from advisors and brokers and that sort of thing in that we don't actually execute trades. We don't give personalized advice. What we do is we hire really talented, really smart people from across finance and government and just so anything that has any sort of bearing or effect on your money, right? We are there trying to hire and attract the biggest talent. And the reason why we do it is so that we can put in front of our subscribers the absolute best research that we can. And then at that point, it's up to the subscriber to take the advice or not, or to take the research and act on it. So that's sort of, it's a nuance, but it's a very important nuance because we very, very strictly adhere to certain policies. For example, we don't give personalized advice. We don't take money from the businesses and the companies that we research and cover. And so we don't take advertising, right? So the question is, well, how do you make money? And that's where the direct response marketing comes in. And for better or worse, our style of direct marketing can be aggressive. And in many cases, it is. It's aggressive in the sense that we really do pull out all the stops to get our message out to people. And look, for anyone who's done that, right, you know how expensive it is, and you know how time consuming it is to put an ad in front of someone and get them to act. And so we happen to use direct response marketing as a vehicle to achieve that. It's not perfect by any stretch, and it has its detractors for sure. But I would argue that direct response marketing is the only form of marketing. It's the only form of monetization where our interest as a business and the interests of our subscribers are aligned, right? Like I could be, we can go out there and manage money, let's say. Well, managing money means I'm taking fees, I'm taking a percentage of something. And so now our interests truly aren't aligned, right? Because as a broker, for example, I'm interested in you trading. And so I want you to, execute more transactions. And so now our interests aren't very aligned. If I'm advising you, even though I may have a fiduciary, right? Our interests aren't aligned. Why? Well, because you're going to pay me whether you're losing money or not, right? Or making money or not, rather. With this model, right, you subscribe, and if you don't like it, you unsubscribe, period, end of story. And so that's sort of the business that we're in. And as far as the use of things like webinars, they've been a huge part of our business model because it works. And that's the other amazing thing about direct response, right? Generally, when you have a direct response format or model, you only do what works. And that's sort of legacy research in a nutshell from what we produce to how we sell what we sell.
So how long have y'all been running webinars?
So interestingly, I started at Stansberry as Naresh pointed out, and we had never really done webinars, at least not in the way that I do them. But in that time, I want to say it really got into full swing probably around 2016, around there. And since then, we've probably generated somewhere in the neighborhood of I don't know, $330 to $350 million in revenue.
So how have webinars changed over those 4 years?
I think they've changed in the sense that it's no longer novel, right? The novelty wore off, and so I think the people who make it big are the ones that come up with actually good, compelling ideas, and the ones who fail will be the ones that continuously try to have sneaky tricks to increase your show up rate, right? Like that. That's a big thing you see, right? How do you get people to show up to your webinar? And then you'll find a blog post or a special report like that, and it's just full of a bunch of stuff which, by the way, is not that it's wrong, right? But it tends to focus on the tactics, And for me, it's simple, right? How do you get people to show up? Have something that is so incredibly urgent to say that your audience that night, if they go to bed not tuning in, they're lying in bed awake, thinking, man, I really should have been on that webinar, right? Like that. I think that's the best. That's the most organic way of getting somebody to show up. It's that what you have to say is of vital importance. And I think that it's more important today than ever before because now that everyone's at home, everyone's used to being on Zoom. I mean, my goodness, 3-4 months ago, whenever, right before this started, nobody knew what Zoom was, right? I mean, they had right? They had like 20 million.
Yeah, my kids are on a Zoom call right now with their preschool class upstairs. So yeah, that never would have happened before this.
Right. Well, they went from 25 million active users to 200 million plus, right? Like that's a 10x growth in their user base. And so the reason I believe that the future of webinars is going to change radically is because there's just screen time overload, right? There's presentation overload. There's just, and it's a thing now, right? People, I'm actually getting on calls where people are like, hey, can we just do it over the phone? I just don't want to do another Zoom, right? So if you're doing a webinar where the vehicle you're using is, on screen, whether it's a video or a slide or whatever, it's the urgency to make sure that you're focusing on the big idea, the urgency that you focus on what you're saying instead of how you're saying it or how you're delivering it, is definitely far greater today.
Fernando, can you give some examples on what's worked as far as getting people to show up? You say you want people to go to bed thinking, man, I really need to get on that webinar. What's worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, in the last couple of years, some, and again, this is all financial. So, some of the bigger topics have been topics like 5G and its impact. Topics like cryptocurrencies, topics, of course, like, what's happening with monetary policy or currencies. And by the way, I'll tell you, just because the topic may sound boring, like if I told you, hey, we're going to have a webinar on currencies, right?
Pretty boring.
I don't think you're right. It's not going to be a barn burner. You're not going to have people just rushing to your event. But if you basically say, you get a smart person up there that says, look, the next 5 years, there's going to be a drastic change in what you can buy, in where you can spend your vacations, I mean, think about that for a second, right? Like you can take a topic as boring as currencies, but make it so that it applies to them today. And there's everywhere you look, we know we have that issue, right? Like, so for example, the economy, we keep hearing all this really bad economic news, and but the stock market keeps going up. Well, you know what? That's probably an interesting topic because it's front and center. People are thinking about it. Now, I wouldn't come out and say that. I would find some sort of way to say it, and I think that's where the difference lies. There's two parts to a successful sort of webinar presentation. The first part is the big idea, and then the second part is the articulation of that idea. Right. So the big idea could be, let's say that cryptocurrencies are going to change the way we live, because of COVID or whatever. That's one thing, or that's the big idea. But then the articulation of the idea, that's where your hook lies. And so that's where I spend most of my time in these two areas. Number one, what's the big idea? And number two, what's the articulation of that big idea? One example recently that we did with cryptocurrencies is this idea that there's all these elements that sort of have come together where we felt that the price of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies would necessarily go up. And so part of our research led us to find certain areas and segments inside the cryptocurrency space where when things like the halving, and this is all a little technical, you don't have to understand it fully, but there's this event called the halving, which occurred, which is the new availability of Bitcoin, or the new available Bitcoins would be cut in half, right? So now you're cutting supply in half. You're cutting new supply in half. And then there's this sort of surging demand, right? And so that's economics 101, right? You cut supply, increase demand. What happens, right? Prices go up. Mm-hmm. Well, part of our research found that prices certainly do go up. And by the way, we see it now. Bitcoin has definitely climbed a lot post-halving. But the idea is that there's areas in the blockchain and crypto space that they don't go up by 2x or 3x. They go up by 100x, 1,000x. And so we came up with this idea called 5 coins to 5 million, right? And so now you're taking, again, it's a big idea already, because there's a lot of evidence showing that cryptocurrencies are absolutely disrupting so many things. And that idea on its own could have worked, and it would have worked, but it wouldn't have worked as strongly as the articulation of the idea, which is 5 coins to 5 million. And so that's an example of how you take a big idea, but then you sort of have to find a way of expressing it or articulating it.
Whenever you are, let's say you're hosting a webinar, what is kind of the best method of actually presenting? Should it just be like, how much of you talking should there be as opposed to slides? Like, what's the way that you actually present it?
For me, I'm usually the host, and I have an expert, and so there's reasons why that works, and I can't I can't fully get into it. I guess if we have some time, I could express it more, but I will tell you this: the best format that I found is a host and expert format. And I know a lot of people, especially, home-based businesses and work at home folks, and, in the biz op space or the internet marketing space, they'll just, turn on a camera or start recording themselves. And that works. That's fine. It's not that it's bad, but I found definitely through testing that you're far better off having a host and an expert. And in terms of slides, that's a good question. I can't tell you that I know precisely what the breakdown is percentage-wise, but I can tell you that me or the expert, or rather the host or the expert, are on screen far more than slides are on screen. And that's just how we currently do it. Some people choose to do like PowerPoint presentation stuff, and that works as well. It's just, for us, we found that we have better success when we make the set almost like a character in the webinar itself, right? So recently, something that we did was, and we called it the Jetinar, which was essentially we did a webinar while, flying 45,000 feet in the air. We took a private plane from Miami to Zurich. And so now the set became the character also, because the reason why we were going to Zurich was we were taking the audience with us to present them the evidence that we had uncovered as to why we believe cryptocurrencies were about to go on a pretty big bull run. And so, we could have just as easily done that in the studio, right? But adding in the jet gave the environment its own character, and it became a central player in this story. And for us, it made sense because our expert, right, he travels the world. And so after this sort of, year-long worldwide travel, we said to our audience, look, how about we take you on his final leg of this worldwide tour, this worldwide trip, because on this final leg, we're going to be showing you and we're going to be showing you some and introducing you to some people that are absolutely going to blow your mind. And so that's why we kind of do it that way. I will say this, unless you have like a proven idea, I wouldn't go to the expense of having like a really high production. I would just, do it on a PowerPoint slide and be done with it. But once you have an idea that is working, then yes, you kind of want to up the production value.
And listeners, you should definitely be taking notes. Fernando and I come from kind of the same school where data runs our decisions. So a lot of what Fernando is saying is backed by data, and he's probably not sharing it because it can get kind of boring. But when he says, having a host on along with an expert or a couple of experts works, that's probably backed by some strong supporting data. So definitely take some notes on what Fernando is saying. Fernando, in going back to the host, I think it is important to have a host, because one person who's an analyst, who's going through their slides and who's answering questions, he can't do it all. It's too much to be reading questions and going with the flow. You need that kind of second person to challenge the expert or the experts, to take the listener questions, to make it more interactive. It's incredibly important for the production value. But then on top of that, you're not talking about a simple webinar where you just get in front of a Zoom and a camera and just start talking. You guys, you're almost like a Hollywood studio. You have a set, a crew. You're getting on private jets. You're taking the set with you from your studio to the private jet. These are very, very high quality, well-produced webinars. So in your experience, for kind of the little guy who's just at home right now listening to our show, what's the best way for them to produce their webinar?
Yeah, that's a great point, Naresh. In terms of data, just for some context, since 2017, these are the numbers just from 2017. I finally pulled up my spreadsheet here. We've had over 9 million people hit our registration pages, and we've registered over 3.5 million people to our webinars. So that's a rough registration rate of around 39%. Some are higher, some are lower, obviously. But that, to me, I feel pretty comfortable with saying, like, look, if people going to your registration page, if they're registering at somewhere in that range, I think it's pretty good. And then, of course, in attendance, we've had over 1.2 million people attend live to our webinar. So that's about a 34% attendance rate. So yes, I could bore you with data and details all day long, but I just wanted to share that with you because we have really, really tested the crap out of this. Everything I'm giving you here is backed by that. What would I recommend? I would say that for me, I think I would start out with a PowerPoint type presentation first, especially if you're just starting out with a warm audience, which I'm assuming most of your listeners have some sort of warm audience, right? And so, and the reason why I say a PowerPoint slide type, almost like a VSL, like a video sales letter, is because that still works. It works really, really well. And it's also very low cost to produce. One of the big mistakes that I find a lot of people make is that they just overcomplicate the process, right? They'll see one of our webinars, or maybe not ours. They'll see, someone that they follow, and they mistakenly believe that unless it looks like that, then it's a failure. And I could tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. Some of my biggest campaigns were campaigns that, from a production, visual vantage point, I'm embarrassed by them. I didn't like them. I didn't like how they looked. But there was no option right at the time, and so I would say that's a myth. Right. I don't want you to think that you have to, especially if you're just starting out. I mean, save your money, save your time, save your resources for sure. I just think that you just got to get it going, especially if you don't have any webinar experience, if you haven't done any, if you're just testing out this, particular format, or even your idea, your best bet is to go down the path of least resistance.
You were talking about your conversion rates there. You registered 3.5 million, but 1.2 came. So how do you reach out to the other 2.3? Do you do webinar replays? And then if you do the replays, do you make them time sensitive, where where it ends after this amount of time, or how do you work that?
We will generally take it as a replay, and it's usually for a limited time. Usually it's about a week later, and so we'll keep messaging the list. The reason why I focus on the live number versus all of the versus the entire campaign is because the live number, for me anyway, gives me a sense of how the rest of the campaign is going to do. And so I would recommend, of course, that when you're planning out a webinar campaign, there's these sort of three phases. There's the pre-build, right? The pre-registration build, which is all the stuff you're going to do to sort of get people excited about, in tune with, make them aware that you have this thing that's coming, right? So that's your pre-build. Then there's the build itself. And this is where you're sending traffic and you're sending your audience to go register. And then there's the post, after the quote unquote live webinar.
We talked about the percentage of people registering, the percentage of people showing up. How does a person know, that they're doing a good webinar? What kind of conversion rate do y'all get from attendance to, actual converted leads? So if people are saying, only 5% are buying, is that good? Is that bad? So, and then they should know if they need to change the way that they're approaching it.
That's a good question. So how do they know? How do they know if what they're doing is good or bad? Right?
Like how do they know if their conversion rate is on par or on average for a webinar, if that's even possible?
I think that it varies. So you can never know. You can't know what your baseline is until you have some data, right? So you have to start the process, and then you just look at the numbers and you look for ways to improve each of those numbers. And so I can't tell you what your conversion rate should be, but I can tell you, right, that a show up rate. So in our case, roughly 34% of people will show up to the live webinar. And by the way, these numbers are for live webinars. I know that there's auto webinars. I don't do auto webinars. So anyway, so I already know that. And when I have a webinar, after the fact, I look, did this one have a higher or lower attendance? If it had lower, what went wrong? What were some of the reasons? If it had higher, what went right? Why did we do that? Now, when you're talking about over 1 million people, showing up to your webinar, I feel pretty confident that 34% attendance is a pretty good number, because that is a huge number to start with. So, for any folks listening, I would say if you're in the 30 to 35% range of people who are showing up, you're in good shape. But, the way you get a more accurate picture in your industry is you need to, be out there speaking to colleagues, getting their numbers, understanding where they're coming from. And so, like, for example, I know that 34% is it's slightly higher than quote unquote industry average. And the reason I put quotes around that is because this stuff is so finicky. I mean, who's to say what industry average really is? Like, what industry precisely? My niche is such a weird niche, right? And so when I give you these numbers is because I speak to a lot of people that produce webinars, and 30% generally seems to be like the show up rate that people sort of all agree, like, yep, this is what we generally get in terms of show up rate. So, I think in order to know whether you're doing good or bad, you sort of have to launch it, get the numbers, and then understand your baselines. And by the way, look, whether it's doing good or bad, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't go to your bank and deposit conversion rates, right? You're depositing cold hard cash, and so
bingo,
right? So like, if you're here's a great example, and I'm glad that I had this spreadsheet open because I'm sort of looking at it, but I've got this webinar in front of me. This was June of last year. And the show up rate was 14%. Now, you remember I told you that 34% is our average across, 1.2 million people who showed up, and 3.5 million people registering. It had a show up rate of 14%, way down off of our average of 34%. Okay, but that campaign, we still did $9 million on it. Okay. Right. So you look at that and you're like, oh my God, this was a failure. No, we put $9 million in the bank account. Now, for me and my team, we will still look and dig and find, like, okay, why exactly is PBV why was this webinar so bad in attendance rate? And so at that point, we'll dig into the numbers after the fact. But that's what I would say. I all these numbers, there's a lot of them are vanity numbers. At the end of the day, is how much money did you keep, right? Like, who cares that the show up rate was half what it should have been? And you may argue, well, Fernando, by that argument, wouldn't you say that you would have made even more money had you had a higher show up rate? Probably. But another theory is that the reason why the show up rate was so low was because that campaign was so targeted to a very specific group of people. And so, yes, the overall show up rate was low, but the show up rate of those who would be most likely interested and therefore most positioned to buy, well, then that show up rate was high. The problem is I could never prove it. It's impossible to tell. So, I don't know if that answers that question.
Yeah.
Well, I want to kind of elaborate that on a little bit more. So just keep in mind, every industry is different. Every business is different. So for you, Fernando, and your business, if you guys do a $5 million webinar, that's probably a failure. That's probably like, oh, that wasn't very successful. But
well, no, 5 million is good. I mean, I guess it also depends on the resources, right? But
okay, well, let's change that number. Let's change that number to 1 million.
Yes.
I've worked with companies who did webinars that generated, 500,000, 600,000. And coming from the Stansberry world, I was like, oh man, that's not that good. But they were ecstatic. They were like, oh, here's your bonus. Great job. Here's another contract. So it's different for each individual, each industry, each business. Last night, for example, I'm on the board of a chamber of commerce here in Tampa Bay, and we did a free webinar for our members. And we had 40 new people register to file. So they were new to file. They had never been to any of our events before. They had never been in our database. And so I thought it was a very successful webinar from the sole perspective that we got 40 new members to join our organization. Forget about how many people showed up to the webinar, but that's just kind of the metric that I looked at, because for our physical events where we're going to restaurants or bars or whatever and having people come in, we'll be lucky to get 10 people who are new to file. But for this webinar, we got 40. So I said, this is a success.
Right. Absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
You said you don't do auto webinars. So these are webinars that are essentially evergreen. They're usually part of some kind of drip campaign. And how come you don't like those kind of taped, pre-recorded auto webinars?
It's not that I don't like them. I think they serve their purpose. The reason why I personally don't do it is every auto webinar platform. I mean, just the concept of the auto webinar, it just seems disingenuous to me, right? The marketing is just so fake. Like you're pretending like there's this live event that's happening. You're buying software that gives you like fake users, and it tells you like, oh, there's 700 people on, blah blah. Like, I just don't like that. I mean, to me, I guess, in a way, if you think about it, we do auto webinars all the time. I just call them VSLs, right? It's just a VSL. It's just a video sales letter. I just think that if you're going to take the approach of getting someone to register for an event, and you're going out of your way to make it look live, that just feels it just feels like very disingenuous. Now, there's a lot of people that do it right, where it's like, hey, we're airing this broadcast at this time. Okay, that definitely softens it a bit for me. So there's ways to do it ethically, I guess is what I'm saying. Now, so that's one issue that I have with auto webinars. The second issue that I have with auto webinars is in our field of financial publishing, because we deal with the stock market and because we deal with like current events, the auto webinar format will go stale, right? Like there's campaigns that we do where they only work for a certain amount of time. So for example, this last cryptocurrency one we did, it had to do with the Bitcoin halving, and the Bitcoin halving occurred this past Monday. Well, guess what? After Monday, that's it. It's done, right? Like we can't continue running that. So if you have an evergreen topic, if you have a topic that's evergreen and doesn't change much, then yeah, I think go for it. I think auto webinars are a good way of promoting them. But if you are going to do the auto webinar, just, be real about it. Don't I just hate the fakingness of it. You know what I mean? It's just, for me personally, it just rubs me the wrong way. And I also think it's insulting. Like when I sign up for an auto webinar, I'm pretty savvy enough to know that it's an auto webinar, and I'm pretty savvy enough to know that there's some software that's running it. And I'm okay with it until I start seeing that what the marketer or the business owner did was they tried to make this environment, making me feel like it's live. And also there's there's the social pressure of it, right? Like, if you're putting up a chat box and there's 800 people on, which by the way, they're all fake, right? They're all fake. But the reality is that there's just 5 people on, like that's such a lie, right? You're making it seem like it's bigger than it is. So anyway, that's my gripe with it.
All right, so I kind of have 2 questions that I'm going to wrap into one. Number one is, we talked about conversion rates. Do you find that webinars convert as well as live events, or should people be expecting an increase or a decrease just in general? And the second question is just, what is the kind of industry standard webinar software that's used, or industry standards if there's more than one webinar program that you prefer using?
So in terms of conversion between a live event like a conference or whatever and webinars, I couldn't really tell you. I've never been big. I've never been involved in a high capacity with conferences. I would imagine that I don't know. I would, if I were to guess, I would say that depending on who's selling from the stage, they'll probably convert a higher rate, during a conference. But I'll tell you, man, the cost of putting conferences together is it's so prohibitive sometimes. And by the way, right now in this post-COVID world, I don't know that we even can, right? For a while anyway.
Let me just jump in really quickly. Me personally, in my experience, I've spoken at conferences and I've also spoken at webinars, and I got way higher return on the webinars. I've flown out. I've been put up in hotels, meals, picked up from the airport, all that good stuff, just like you, Fernando. I've done that, and it's actually kind of turned into a waste of time, where I only picked up maybe 10, 15 quality leads, and of those I maybe converted. We're talking about a conversion rate of less than 1% if you include everyone who attended my lectures or presentations. Whereas webinars, instant. Like, I've done online summits, online webinars. I've been guests on other podcasts, which are kind of like webinars, and I put together a direct response campaign, like, hey, visit this website to get your free book. And like within seconds, I start getting, I can see on my email list, like the leads just multiplying. And so I've just found, from a time perspective, I don't have to take 3 days out of my busy week and hop on a plane and wake up early in the morning and be at the whim of a conference. I found webinars to be just higher return, cheaper to produce, easy to get to. So that maybe that answers it.
Yeah, look, I have to agree with you. I mean, look, I don't know, if maybe if you're Grant Cardone, you disagree with this. I don't know, or maybe if you're
Robbins,
Russell Brunson,
probably.
Tony Robbins, right? Yeah, that, I think that's different. But here's what's funny though. In a live event like that, the big winners are Grant Cardone and Tony Robbins, right? But if you're just up there selling from the stage, chances are you're only getting a cut of whatever it is that you're selling. And then on top of that, it's a pain in the butt to get out there, and you don't even really know if it's a fully targeted crowd that you're talking to. So I guess I should qualify my statement, which is live in person can convert the number, the raw number could probably be bigger. But as I said earlier, you can't deposit conversion rates, right? The money you get to keep in your pocket is far greater on a webinar than it is on a live event. That's absolutely, I believe that. As far as industry software, I would have to say that so for me, we do really high volume events. So what we use is going to be very different. I, I don't think there's anything wrong at all with like, go to webinar, right? If now once you start hitting any level of volume, what I would recommend is this platform called Livestream. I think Livestream is great. I think that I mean, look, YouTube is great. I don't know, maybe a YouTube Live, an Instagram Live, a Facebook Live. I mean, all those platforms are sufficient. They really are. Now, if you're beyond the startup stage, right? If you're beyond that, and you have some capital that you can invest in your business, I would probably invest in creating your own wrapper, like your own player page, right? Because then what you can do is they go to this website, which is something that you had developed, and the actual video feed gets played on live stream or YouTube. It doesn't matter. But where you embed that video, that environment, it's yours. And so the reason why I went with that solution instead is because a lot of the all-in-one sort of webinar platforms, they're just not good for very high volume events. The capacity issues you run into are enormous. So if you do have some money and that you can invest in your business, and if you are putting together events that are growing in number, I mean, I would say that once you start hitting the 3,000 to 5,000 people showing up at your webinar, it's probably time for you to go for a custom solution. And the custom solution I would recommend is live stream as your video. You may want to do a concurrent stream via YouTube in case the live stream goes down. And I would have a developer develop a video wrapper for you. And for me, my video page is very simple. It's just a question box, a little box on top of the question box that allows me to like post like little messages to the whole group. And then, of course, the ability to have a call to action show up whenever I want it to show up. That's it. So like the call to action, the way my software works is the minute the call to action is ready, either me or whoever's manning the station can just push a button, or you can time it to the not like time on page, but you could actually time it to the physical hour of the webinar itself. That was not very complicated to get a developer to work on. Right now, the third thing you want to do if you go down that path is I would try to hire somebody that understands how to develop on Google Firebase. And the reason why you want to develop on Firebase is because once you start sending people to your server, just because the video is playing on live stream, that's great because live stream has enormous bandwidth, YouTube, enormous bandwidth. But now the bottleneck now becomes your page. The bottleneck is now the page that you have, right? And so if you develop it on Google Firebase, you'll have capacity up to 100,000 concurrent users, which is, way more than enough. I think only once we had a big event and we needed to do 2 instances of Google Firebase, and I had the developers basically just route traffic between the 2 pages. But for most people, you just those are the 3 things you need: live stream, a custom player / wrapper, and a developer that can develop on Firebase.
Very nice. Fernando Cruz, he is a partner and chief marketing officer at Legacy Research. He's going to be back on the next episode talking about, I think, an even more important topic for people working from home, and that is resilience and bouncing back after tough times. We got some listeners who've been unemployed, lost their jobs during this pandemic. Fernando has some great advice to share. He's been there, done that. Fernando, I think your nickname should be the $300 million man, because that's how much you've made in webinar. That's how much you've generated in webinars. So the $300 million man's going to be back. Fernando Cruz, the website is legacyresearch.com, legacyresearch.com. Fernando, any final thoughts about Legacy or anything you want to promote, maybe an offer or a giveaway to our listeners?
No, I don't have anything to promote, but certainly you can check me out on my Instagram as Cruz Can't Lose. And there's actually a story behind why I chose that name, and I'll share it with you here in that next segment.
Awesome. Fernando Cruz, looking forward to the next episode. For our listeners, check us out, workfromhomeshow.com, workfromhomeshow.com for all our previous episodes. And until next time, keep on working from home.